from the Pain PT. Thanks for coming today. I have a success story, which I know everybody loves to hear. I have Jessica here. Jessica, how you doing?
I'm good, Jim. Great to be here today.
Yeah, we just talked off air. How I'm looking forward to hearing your story, and
Yeah.
I'm going to turn it over to you and share your success story here.
Yeah, it's great to be here today, Jim. I met with you, I want to say it was about 2.5 years ago now. And I remember sharing with you that I had, recovery stories were such a huge source of hope and support for me, and that I really wanted to be a recovery story with you someday. And I remember you said to me, well, if you believe it, then you will be. So it feels a bit surreal sitting here with you today, a couple years later. But I'm Jessica. I live in Northern California with my husband of 25 years this year, and I have two children and a French bulldog named Norman. And I work as a registered dietitian. I have for a long time. So, food and nutrition and cooking and sharing a meal together is one of my greatest joys in this life. So, my recovery story starts at the beginning with I always say it's the not so fun stuff to share, but it's important because it shaped so much of my journey. But I grew up in a very hyper religious family. And with that home environment came a lot of shame and fear for me as a child. I had one parent in particular who was very emotionally and physically abusive. And ultimately, that led me to leaving home my senior year of high school, about midway through, and kind of be out on my own from that point on. I share that. And having done all of this work now, I can say I have tremendous compassion for who my parents are and the experiences that ultimately shaped them. And also, those early years were really painful, and they, really influenced the personality traits that I developed early on. Because what I found was once I was out in the real world and needing to make my way as a young woman, is I was receiving positive attention for what felt like the first time in my life, based on two things. The first was my appearance, and the second was on my performance, both personally and professionally. And pretty early on, I was working in a, finance setting. It was a very masculine space. And so the hypervigilance that I developed around those two things to kind of show up perfectly and perform perfectly, it kind of felt like, looking back, like life or death. There was no other way for me to really show up and be successful in this world. And so that really became kind of the lens in which I operated through, was this kind of high performing, high achieving, later develop, disordered eating, like body dysmorphia, like all the things that develop that come from that. But that was really just kind of the lens that I lived through for pretty much my whole adulthood. And for a really long time, I really buried my past. There were very few people at any point in my life that knew what my home life was like as a child. And I certainly didn't have time or any need to acknowledge that as I got older. And I think there was a lot of shame that was associated with that, And then later, when I started to do the work on my journey, was really a tremendous source of grief as well, because part of leaving, a very hyper religious family and a large extended family was that it was me, was that I left this religion as well, this church. And it was made very clear to me as a pretty young woman that I was no longer welcome within the family. And so I think that loss of that family that was so woven into the daily fabric of my life was a big part of the weight that I carried into adulthood. And later, when I was doing the work, was a tremendous source of grief that needed to come up and be witnessed as well. But looking back, I always, I think we all say this, is like, I have always lived in a sensitive body since a young child. I mean, even like early toddler years with, just recurrent GI related symptoms, and the random, like, acute kidney affection when I was 7 that nobody could make sense of. And as I was getting older, those symptoms were just compounding. My body was speaking louder and louder into my high school years. I, had anxiety and depression, and the GI symptoms were getting louder, and that just really compounded and really just carried into adulthood. It was just getting louder and louder. But
So at that time, you just kind of powered
Oh,
through it, or you just ignored
of
it.
course. There
Yeah.
was no, it was sink or swim for me. There was no time for feeling anything. And it really felt like kind of a superpower, like to bypass my physical and emotional needs. I mean, the number of times people have said to me, I don't know how you do it all, like, how do you do it all? It's like, well, I did it, but it came at a cost. And so as I was going into adulthood, things were just getting louder. And, went to the ER when I was like 20 or 21, thinking I was having a heart attack. And they're like, no, you're fine. It's just a panic attack. And they like send you home with some medication. And I think I had two or three colonoscopies and endoscopy when I in my 20s because my body was speaking louder and louder. And of course, I was hoping that there was like a quick fix or a reason for it. And so later, probably in my late 20s, was when I wasn't finding any relief through the conventional medical model. So that's when I really started to seek out like alternative healthcare and integrative medicine and started working with, holistic healthcare practitioners and naturopaths and nutritionists. And, it really did help me for a while. I mean, I definitely was starting to make some changes in my life that felt supportive. I'd found yoga. So I was seeking things to help, but I was still living at this full sprint. I don't think I would have even felt safe for me to slow down. And ultimately, around this time is when I left I was working in finance, so I left that field and became a registered dietitian. But also during this time, I think that like being healthy, quote unquote healthy, became like a shield for me. And I was a little bit rigid and righteous about it as well. And it just felt like kind of a security blanket at the time. And so, I would be, and that was just pretty much adult life. I would be taken to the edge of symptoms, and then I would like white knuckle my way back into like being able to function.
You
But
kind
then
of
life
like
was,
got into a bit of a fight mode, right? Like kind of,
oh yeah,
yeah,
life was
fighting your way through, right? Pushing through.
life was completely lived at a fight at fighting my way through. There was no, it was either done at like a full sprint and then you crash, and that was the cycle, right? Then you'd crash for like a day and then you would mobilize again and you would start over. And so, but then life was getting busier. I had kids, I was married, I was working, I was always pursuing some kind of certification or a master's program. And then there were just a couple key tipping points for me that kind of tipped me over and I never righted myself back up completely. So the first was COVID. I got COVID pretty early on. I think it was the Delta strain. And it was really the sickest I'd ever been. I think everyone around me was actually really surprised at how sick I was. It took me out for a couple of weeks. At the time, by this time, I'm working in functional medicine. So I was working as a dietitian in a really robust functional medicine clinic. And I mean, there was so much fear around COVID, there was so much unknown. And so when I got it, I think I was pretty scared of having it as well. And I was a few days in and I woke up and I felt something strange on the side of my face. And I remember jumping up and running and looking in the mirror thinking I was getting Bell's palsy, which I didn't get. But looking back, I was just thinking about this the other day. I wouldn't be surprised if there had been maybe someone who'd had Bell's palsy, like in our clinic, like a patient maybe, and maybe that had even planted that, in my mind. But I didn't get Bell's palsy, but I started having strange neurological symptoms. So it started this kind of tingling in the side of my face and head, and then I was started having like right-sided body weakness that I would notice when I was like typing, because I at this point I'm in a master's program, so I'm in bed with COVID and I'm like probably working on my thesis and I'm typing. I'm realizing like my right hand can't quite keep up with my left, and my right foot when I would be walking couldn't quite keep up, but it was pretty mild, but it was noticeable. And so there was definitely some fear around that. And
Yeah.
then over the next 2 years, I just started to collect diagnoses. Because at this point, again, I'm working at a medical clinic that has access to every test. So I'm having all the tests run on me. So I test positive for Lyme, I test positive for a co-infection called Bartonella.
Wow.
I have a MRI that shows abnormalities. I have a lesion. So I'm starting on my brain. So I'm starting to really genuinely have concern that I might have early stage, like multiple
Yeah.
sclerosis.
MS.
Yeah, MS. And I had lived through a massive remediation from a water leak in our home. So the stress of living through that is enough, but when you work in the functional medicine space and you've been exposed to mold, I mean, that's like
Yeah.
five level alarm. And so the
Right.
fear
The
is
fear, I
compound.
could imagine, I'm just listening to this, imagining this fear just growing and growing, right? With
Yeah,
all these test results and
yeah,
water remediation, everything, right? Just building and
right.
building.
And in the field I'm working in. So I see I see people who are living with these diagnoses. But at the same time, I'm also just kind of packaging it up and putting it away and still living life like it is. And then, just recurrent GI symptoms, SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, had always been something I tested positive for and would treat and would come back. And so, that was kind of this like 2 year period. And then during that time, I was starting to get more sensation in my face and head. And it wasn't extremely painful at that point, but it was definitely pronounced and it was noticeable and it was scary because I had never encountered anyone in all of my years in medicine, even that had had any kind of nerve or anything going on in their face and head. And so, um, I really kind of just tried to ignore it. But it got so loud at one point, I did pursue this alternative treatment where they inject a substance into your face that's actually kind of like a numbing agent called procaine. And the provider didn't tell me that when they inject it, it's going to numb your face. And I was living with this fear that I was going to get Bell's palsy. And so it was a treatment that went very sideways and my face went numb and I thought, I was getting Bell's palsy and all of this. So the week or two after that treatment, the pain skyrocketed in the side of my face and head, but then it just went away, like almost overnight, it just completely
Mm.
went away. And so this was basically life. I was just kind of limping along. I was in a master's program. I was
So again, you were
life,
still fighting through life. You were still
yeah.
going,
It
even
was,
in spite of all these things you were feeling and the symptoms. And
oh yeah. But life was feeling unsustainable. My soul was longing to get off of this hamster wheel. And I just kept telling myself, okay, I just got to like army crawl over the finish line for this master's program and then I'll reevaluate. And so unfortunately, I didn't quite make it that far. So the final tipping point for me was one of my kids got sick and they brought home some kind of virus and I picked it up and I didn't stay home. I was pretty sick and I should have taken care of myself. And instead, I just kind of pushed through and went to work. And I remember just being so sick at work and just limping through my day and limping through the week. And even instead of resting in the evening, taking care of myself, I would go to like social events. Because at this point, I was the yes person. I had a very busy social life. I was traveling, I was momming, I was working, I was doing multiple certification programs. And I make it to Friday and I, went to bed that night late after a social event. And I woke up Saturday and I was in the kitchen making coffee because at this point I lived on caffeine like all day. That's how I got through. And it just felt like something had exploded on the side of my face and head. And I fell to the floor, and my husband had to call 911. And, my kids are around me and they're crying. And I'm taken by ambulance to the ER. And they do their whole workup and they're just like, we can't find anything wrong with you. They send me home and they just say, follow up with your primary care physician. And that was really the start of my journey with chronic pain. It really never went
mm.
away
And
from
maybe
that point
just
on.
like let the audience know because these symptoms are real. It's not like if they don't find anything wrong, it doesn't like the intensity of the symptom you could have that now you realize your brain could produce. I think it's so
Right.
important to highlight that you can have, right? It was sounds like that was really severe
Yeah.
pain,
Yeah.
right?
It's nerve pain in your face. Any of us that's experienced. And it felt like it was inside my head and on the side of my face. And so, yeah, I mean, they're looking for like a tumor, they're looking for something acute that they can treat or, admit you to the hospital. And so they just said, follow up with your primary care. And I think there might have been discussion around maybe it being MS, like thinking it was a neurodegenerative condition. And so, a couple days later, I go and I meet with my doctor, who's the medical director of the clinic. She's a brilliant woman. I've worked with her for years. And she, said, look, everything you're presenting with matches a diagnosis of trigeminal neuralgia. And she just said, there's really not much that can be done acutely for you. And there was discussion around different medications that I could try to take. There was talk about it maybe being like a post-viral neuralgia because I had gotten sick, but it was not, it was not a positive conversation. It was that if this is nerve damage, that it takes a very long time for nerves to heal. I remember her sharing like the amount that a nerve heals like every month, it's like microscopic.
Yeah.
And so and at that point in my career, I actually really believed healing was often possible because I had seen that. Like, even for me, with the diagnosis of MS, I had seen people heal from MS, and I had seen people heal from things you shouldn't heal from. We're told you're not supposed to heal from cancer, autoimmunity. I believed healing was often possible. What I had never
Which
seen.
was amazing, right? Because if you didn't have
Yeah.
that, you probably would have spiraled further.
Well, what I had never seen anyone heal from, Jim, was a neuropathic condition. I had a close family member, actually, my mom had had CRPS 10 years prior. So I had seen what happens when you have a severe pain condition like that and you go through the traditional medical route with medication and pain, all of that. And I knew of one other case where someone had had a similar thing, and these weren't good outcomes. Like, to me, this was a really dire diagnosis. And so I left that appointment just feeling absolutely dejected and devastated. And no one could believe this was happening to me. The amount of people who said, but you're the healthiest person I know, which isn't helpful, by the way.
Right.
But at the same time, I was very close friends with another medical doctor who practiced medicine very differently. I didn't quite understand how she practiced medicine, but I knew that the work that was coming from her work was the healing, rather, was unlike anything I'd ever heard of before. And so I went directly to her office, and I remember sitting in the room, and she comes in, and I'm hysterical and I'm in so much pain and I'm so scared. And I'm like, I have been diagnosed with trigeminal neuralgia. My life is over. And she just sat in front of me. I think she held my hands and she looked at me in the eye and she said, Jessica, she said, if you want to label this trigeminal neuralgia because it makes you feel safer, she said, you can. But she said, I don't practice through labels. And she said, and I believe what's happening right now is the culmination of many things that have led you to this point. And she said, I also believe that you can fully heal from this and that everything you need is inside you right now. She said, your body is actually trained to heal you right now. That's why you're
What an
feeling
amazing
this.
doctor, by the way. Wouldn't I'm sure people are listening, go, oh my God, I wish my doctor said that to me.
And it sounded great, Jim. I mean, I knew her well and I trusted her. And I think maybe her saying that to me was probably because we did have a personal relationship. I don't know. And it sounded great. And she even said, you know, the conversation was long. She spent a long time with me, and she said, "Look, you're being called to a much deeper level of healing in this lifetime than many people will be." She said, "A lot of people won't have to do this work." And she said, "But if you're willing to do the work, your life will change. It'll be better than anything you could imagine." And so that sounded great, but I just didn't know
You
what
didn't,
this
you
word
walked
was.
out of there, it was very reassuring, but you still didn't quite
Well, it's like,
believe
just
that.
tell me what the work is, and also, can you give me something in the meantime to help with the pain? So I do remember leaving that appointment and just feeling so much better. And, the pain was still there, but the dial of fear had been
Yeah,
turned down
turned down.
tremendously. And I remember going home and, sleeping better that night. And, I wish that was like the end of my story. Unfortunately, it was not.
What
Definitely a
was the
long
beginning? You just call it the beginning of the end. She planted that seed, right? She gave you
did.
that hope and that.
Yeah, and it's why I found the work, I think, as early as I did. But so I go home the next few days and, the pain's back and the fear is ratcheting up. And I am still living in the space of like, what is the cause of this? Like root cause medicine, right? Functional medicine, root cause. So there had been talk about potential like dental triggers. A lot of times I think with trigeminal neuralgia, we're looking in the mouth, we're looking at teeth, and so I had consulted with a dentist that I knew. And I remember calling him and saying, I've been diagnosed with this trigeminal neuralgia. And the first thing he said to me, he said, "Oh no," he said, "that's the suicide disease." He said, "Don't do it, but I just want to let you know that's what it's called."
Oh,
And I just remember,
talk
Jim,
about the opposite message.
I'm on the phone and I recognize how crazy this is for a medical provider to say this to anyone. And I just have to pick it up and set it aside because I think he might be able to help me. And I end up getting on a plane and going with my husband to Southern California and meeting with this guy. And fortunately didn't follow through with what he recommended and came home that evening. But that just, that's the state we're in. We're so desperate. We're willing to set aside anything like that if someone can help us. And so I came home and I just remember the was dialing up, the fear. And over the next few days, it's becoming almost unbearable. And I am not able to sleep at all. I couldn't sit still in my body. So I would just walk the halls of my home at night and just constantly be moving. And we called my doctor back and just said, like, because there were things we were doing. I mean, we were working on these inputs of dysregulation. It was definitely more from a medical standpoint, but nothing was changing because I was terrified of what was happening to me. And so it was getting more intense. And now I'm not sleeping. So we know how that is. And so we call her and she said, "Okay, this is what I want you to do." She said, "I want you to go outside, get out of your house, go sit in the sunshine, go sit outside." And she said, "I want you to get your daughter's safe and sound protocol," which is this sound-based music therapy. It was developed by Stephen Porges. So like her clinic is very much in this nervous system world. And she said, it's supposed to help like tone the vagal nerve. My daughter was doing it. So I was like, okay. She said, "I want you to listen to it for 15 minutes. So at this point, you're like, okay. So I go outside, I pop the earbuds in, I lay in the sun. I think I kind of dozed off while I'm listening to it. It's like Disney music. And it turns off 15 minutes later, and I open my eyes, and the pain had literally turned off. Like someone had gone into a control room and hit the switch, Jim. It was the craziest thing I have still probably ever experienced in terms of the power of the nervous system, because at that point the pain was, when you're in that much pain, you can barely open your eyes. I was walking around with a big sweatshirt and the hood over, and everything's too loud, everything's too bright. And so when that just switches off in an instant like that, I just remember it was kind of like the later end of the day, and I just remember sitting outside for hours looking at the sun, the sunset, looking at nature, just in awe of what had just happened to me.
So
And also
dramatic, right? So such a contrast.
just in awe of what my body was capable of doing. And so that was one of the first signs, like, oh, okay, there's hope for me. If my nervous system, I knew it was my nervous system. I didn't know anything about this work. I'd never heard of any of it really, but I knew that, okay, if my nervous system could do that, there was hope for me. And in the meantime, again, I'm looking for a quick, a fix. And so I knew about a clinic in the Midwest that specialized in neuropathic conditions.
So you just back up for a second. So you had
Yeah.
that profound shift,
Yeah.
nervous system calmed down symptoms, but then after that, you didn't have that. It came back. How
It
long did
was
it
about
take you to
12
recover?
hours. It
Okay.
was about 12 hours. And
Yeah.
then it came back the next
Came
day.
back. And then when you subsequently used it again, you didn't get that same.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Oh
This is
yeah.
common too, by the way. People
I
can
was
get that.
religious with that safe and sound therapy. I was listening to that Disney music. No, no, that was, and I think part of it too is I was in such a state of deep surrender because of the condition I was in. I hadn't slept in 3 days. I just talked to this doctor that I trust implicitly. She's like, "Listen to this." And then and it wasn't even like a pain level of 2. It was like 0, completely off. So yeah, it was gone for about 12 hours and then came back the next day. And so, I'm still terrified and a lot. It's very, a lot of pain. And so knew about this clinic in the Midwest. They specialized in neuropathic conditions. I followed them for about a year, ironically, because of what my mom had experienced. And so they their outcomes were amazing. So I had, in the meantime, this has only been a week since my diagnosis, I had scheduled a consult with this medical director, and I jump on a call with her, and she's just said, trigeminal neuralgia, CRPS of the face and head. She said, we can help you. Can you get out here? And I was like, okay, absolutely. And it was the beginning of summer. I mean, we're desperate. You'll do anything. And so I moved my whole family to the Midwest in the hopes that this would heal me. And I think the intention was to live there for 4 months, almost 3 to 4 months. And over the next week, I was planning this move of my family. And every day I was so convinced this was the ticket for me that every day the pain was going down and down. So that by the time I flew out there, I was saying, oh, I'm 90% better. I'm just coming here to hopefully have this never happen to me again.
Mm.
And I really thought that I was going to get there and be like their best patient ever. Like I was going to whip through the clinic in like 4 weeks and be like their star, pupil. And unfortunately, it was again not the solution for me. But I learned about two things that were really important for me. And the first was I had started working with a pain therapist who had just attended a training with Dr. Schubner, just learned about PRT, pain reprocessing therapy. And so she introduced it to me. She said, hey, I just learned about this. Can I do some of the like meditation or somatic tracking kind of work with you? And then the other was I had stumbled upon the Curable app while I was there. So I was introduced to these concepts, but while I was there, I, for a variety of reasons, genuinely thought I did have MS. I thought I needed to come home. I needed to confirm whether I did have it. I don't think I would have healed I don't think I would have moved through chronic
So you
pain
were
because I was
so you had gone
healthy.
there feeling a lot better. When you were there, did the symptoms get worse or did they stay? Did you still feel like the same or what
Yeah,
happened?
so they tell you when they start working with you that your symptoms are likely going to get worse. They kind of call it poking the bear, a little bit of the nervous system. And so within a week of me getting there, not only did they worsen, it spread to my whole face and head and was making
Okay,
its way
so
down my
really you get there 90% better and then it starts getting worse. Yeah.
Yeah, so that really did kind of poke the bear.
Yeah.
So I came home with my tail between my legs for sure. And it was spreading, it was really on its way to like my whole body. I was starting to feel burning
You
in
were
my
there
arm.
for a month,
I was there for 2 months
two
before I
months.
came
So you went there 90% better. You came back worse than ever, it sounds like.
significantly worse. Yeah, and they're telling you just hang in there. I remember one of the therapists was like, you have to be the buffalo. The buffalo charges the storm. And so I was like, okay, I'll be the buffalo. I'm going to stay here. And then it just got to the point where I just needed to come home. I wasn't getting better. I didn't think that that was going to be it for me. And so I came home kind of with my tail between my legs and went under the care again of my doctor. And the first thing she asked me is if I could do one of the brain retraining programs, which is interesting because we knew about, and even in the clinic I worked in, we would recommend the brain retraining programs. We could very rarely get anyone to want to do them. And so I knew about them. And so I said, sure, I'll do it. And so I started one of them. And ultimately it wasn't the best fit for me, but there were two really important things that I learned through that right away. The first was this ability to recognize when I'm having really catastrophizing thoughts and redirect them. And that was something, I was swimming in catastrophizing 24/7. Like, I really wanted to go into like a cave of healing and not come out until I was all better. I think I had a lot of shame around what was happening to me, and especially given who I was supposed to be, this like healthy person working in
Mm.
health. And so I was swimming in that, and it was in isolation. I was wanting to be alone. I didn't want to talk to people or see people. And so to have this tool to recognize that and to redirect it, I noticed right away it didn't change the pain I was experiencing, but it changed my experience in my body. And then the other was meditation. So this particular program wanted you to do guided meditation in the morning and evening for like 20 to 30 minutes. And I noticed right away it was for sleep, it became just an amazing tool for me. I could actually get to sleep doing a guided meditation. And not only could I get to sleep when I would wake up, because at this point I was sleeping maybe 2 hour stretches if I was lucky. And I think all of us who have lived with chronic pain, the nights can be extremely isolating and dark. And, the amount of times that I would wake my husband up in just total despair, in the middle of the night. And so this guided meditation started to give me this tool to stay in my body. And so I could, even if I couldn't get back to sleep, I could meditate at night. And so all of a sudden I felt like I had a little bit of agency around all of this. And so it wasn't changing my pain, but now all of a sudden I was now starting to get sleep, which was huge.
Yeah.
And then, there's just this kind of like series of synchronicities that lead you to the next thing. And so I stumbled upon a woman named Vanessa Asilis. Her offering's called Your Grateful Guide on Instagram. And she just has a really profound healing story. And I just remember being introduced to this, idea of being able to heal from something that you're not supposed to heal from. And she had just launched her own kind of resources that included a lot of guided meditations and things you could listen to. And so it gave me a lot of hope. It wasn't changing my pain yet, but I would listen to these recordings, especially at night or during the day. And I was starting to get hope and belief that there was maybe, maybe I could heal. And then she introduced me to Alan Gordon. And I remember the day that I learned about his book, The Way Out. I listened to it on audio, and it was the day that I had trialed intranasal ketamine for the pain. So I was living with pretty severe pain still at this point. And I remember I just laid and listened to I laid on the couch and listened to the book and all in one go of it. And it just felt like my entire story in this book, the way that it described the pain, all of the personality traits. And it was the first time that I felt like I had a clear path out. And I was like, okay, this is the path for me. I don't know how long it'll take, but I know that if all of these people can heal from this kind of pain, then so can I. And I remember just deciding like that day or the next that I was going to stop talking about this. I was not going to talk about the pain anymore. And I wasn't talking about it to a lot of people, but I had a small circle that I talked to about it incessantly. And so I think my family had a little bit of a whiplash because all of a sudden I just stopped talking about it completely. And I just remember, I was standing in my kitchen and I just was like, you know what? I am going to start living as if I'm fully healed. Because again, I was pretty isolated. I was wanting to heal and then come out and just be like, I healed from all of this, and we don't heal in isolation. We really meant to be witnessed and heal in community with people, And so that next, after The Way Out, then I was introduced to Nicole Sachs' work, of course, and found a recovery story or two that really resonated for me. It sounded, we find these recovery stories that we resonate with. And so there was one in particular, and it was ironically, it was like the worst case or the hardest case I ever treated. And it sounded so similar to my story. And it just, again, I was building all of this hope and belief in myself. And then I started doing, her journal speak, which is part of my journey. I definitely journaled, especially those first few months when I found the work. And so much of this, Jim, is hard to believe that your emotional world could be causing this pain. And even while you're getting evidence in real time, it's still hard to believe. But the thought of journaling for me, because that is not something I had ever done, I had never dipped into that emotional or past world of mine, made the pain I was experiencing worsen for days, even thinking about journaling. And then I remember one day in particular, journaling about something I'd never said out loud, never even acknowledged for myself. And the pain in my face just raged for the whole day. And so
Yeah.
I,
That's, I just paused for a second, like that's evidence, like you're looking for,
yeah,
well, what's causing the pain to go up? And then if you start thinking about
yeah,
emotions and pain
yeah,
goes up, it's like, well, yeah. But even then, like you said, we're so disconnected from emotions that even if the evidence is right in our face, we still sometimes
Yeah.
can't that, we can't see it, right? Like, oh,
Oh, no.
A causes B. Hey, I'm doing emotional work. My pain's shooting through the roof. Well, that's certainly nothing physical, right? That's an emotional provocation. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and it's hard to believe even while it's happening. And so
Correct.
then when I'm journaling, I'm starting to journal and I'm realizing that it would be, I had a lot to unpack. And I never did like the list that Nicole Sachs recommended.
Mhm.
It was a little bit more of whatever was coming up for me at the time. But I realized that it would be helpful for me to have someone to journey alongside while I unpacked that. And so that's when I found, again, through kind of synchronicities, Christy Weepy with the Better Mind Center, who is a huge, supporter and fan of your work, Jim. And
Yeah,
so
Christy's
I,
great.
yeah, I was able to start to unpack with her, and I actually still work with her today. So I've worked with her for almost 2 years now. And from the very beginning, it was really important to me. Once I knew that it was possible for me to heal, the people that I wanted to work with needed to fully believe in me. So I remember I had listened to a podcast where she was being interviewed and she talked about working with a girl who had face pain and the girl had recovered. And so that's how I had like sought her out and worked with her. But I just remember asking her, like, do you believe that I could heal from this, from what you know about me? And she said 1000%. And so I think it's so important to find, we're not meant to do this alone, and to find whatever way, whatever support you can that's, available to you in some way, whether it's therapist or coach or, group. But she journeyed alongside. And then as I journeyed further, that's when I knew the role of a coach, and we had health coaches in the clinic that I worked at, so I'd worked alongside coaches for a long time, and so I knew the difference between a coach and a therapist, and I thought it would be really helpful to work with a coach, and so that later in the journey, because this was about a 2-year journey for me, I found Jeannie Coleman, who you know as well, and
Yeah, Jeannie's also great.
yeah, she thinks she's been on your show or your yeah interviewed,
Yeah, I've
and so
worked with Jeannie too
you
for a
did
while.
work with
Her
Jeannie. You were
recovery.
her coach.
She's
Yeah.
now coaching, which is awesome and doing an awesome
Yeah.
job.
Yeah. I actually worked with Jeannie for over a year as my coach. And so, because it was a longer journey for me. And, I think
Yes,
so
about
much of
2 years.
it,
So it's good to I was going to ask you that. So from
yeah.
the worst of it, right, when it hit that worst point, it was about a 2-year process, you'd say, to get back.
Yeah. I was never going to be, looking back now, I realize like the work that for me, my journey, I wasn't going to be, if I had been a quick recovery story, I think it would have popped somewhere else up in my body in some way, probably. But I do remember hearing you say you were talking to someone and you said something like, I always tell people you got to give it at least 2 years before you decide this work isn't going to work for you. And I really took that to heart. I was like, okay, I'll give this 2 years. I don't know, maybe that was why it took 2 years, Jim. Who knows?
Yeah, it's
But
true. You got to be careful how you say it. You don't want to, because I'm always thinking that. I don't want to tell somebody it's going to take that long. The truth is, you don't know.
we
I
don't
think the
know.
best thing is no timeline, and that's hard for people to stay with that, right? But yeah, if you put the timeline out far enough that it's so far in the future that at least you're not having to think about, oh, next month or 6 months, it's
Yeah.
very helpful.
Well, and what I'll share too is the 2 year period, things were improving. It wasn't like I was living with 24/7 pain for 2 years and it went away. The dial was turning down on the pain as the time went on. And also during that time, I was noticing I was in a lot of other improvements in my life during that time. So I was getting physically stronger. I had more energy. There came a point where I actually felt really good in my body, probably the best I ever had, and I still had pain. And so, I think everyone always wants to know like how long did it take you and what did you do to recover, right? And so for me, recovery was never about following like a rigid protocol or a program. It was about finding a deep daily rhythm that my nervous system could trust, because I had spent a lifetime completely bypassing my physical and emotional needs. And I remember one day just realizing that, I kind of had two youngerish children at the time. And I realized that there were all these things that I do, this rhythm I create for my children to help them stay regulated. And, I have my younger child, he's a lot like me. He feels things deeply, he feels things emotionally, he feels things in his body. And rhythm for him is even more important just to keep him regulated. And so I really asked myself, like, how could I begin to mother myself in the same way? Like, what do
Mm.
children need to be regulated? They need regular outside time. They need movement. They need regular nourishing meals. Like, we know what happens if a kid goes 6 hours without eating. They need wind down rituals and wake up rituals. I was used to getting out of bed, walking to the coffee pot, walking to my laptop, not giving myself even 10 or 15 minutes to just allow my nervous system and body to wake up for the day. And so I really started to apply that to myself. And what that looked like for me was the first was meditation. Meditation from day one was a really soothing experience for my human existence. It allowed me to become a compassionate witness to what I was experiencing, kind of from a safe distance, whether it was physical or emotional. And it was guided meditation. I never have really gotten into like silent meditation, but um, I found resources for that, like Danny Fagan, who is a voice in this world. She's got amazing resources around guided meditations and yoga nidra. I really got into Joe Dispenza's work. I know he doesn't resonate with everyone, but his work really resonates for me. And through his guided meditation offerings, I was able to start to embody the emotional state of, what it would feel like if I didn't live with chronic pain. Like, what would that actually feel like? And so I would memorize that. And I would sometimes try to dip into that state of being. Like, what would it feel like if I didn't have it? And then I really cultivated a mindfulness practice. And that's something that's still really important to me today. I mean, you know this, but I think we spend like 90% of our time in the future and the past just thinking about that. And so it really, in the beginning, I had to catch those thoughts. I mean, I don't even know, 100 times a day where I'm thinking about other things and bring it back to the present moment over and over and really start to notice, like if I'm in the kitchen, where I love to be, what am I chopping? What am I seeing? Like smelling the spices. Like I still smell all the spices, and when I open them up, I'll smell them. And when I'm out on my walks, slowing down. And I remember hearing someone say, count 10 different trees when you're out walking. And I really do that. I really try to count like 10 different trees, or I got really good at noticing the color of the sky. Like there's a lot of different blue colors of the sky, and noticing the wind on my face and the sun on my face and my body. So I started to develop this
Hmm.
awareness of like pleasant sensations
I
in
was
my
going to
body.
say you were moving your attention towards pleasant
Yeah.
or neutral sensations that you otherwise wouldn't have noticed, right? You'd just be focusing on the pain. Yeah,
Yeah. And it was, and this is while I still had a lot of pain.
correct.
And
It's very
even now,
important you said that because I just did a video yesterday. I said, move your attention, starve it of attention, move your attention to safety to teach
mhm.
your brain that, right? Or neutrality or positivity, because, and that's what you did in spite of the pain.
Yeah, so and I still have trained myself, like when I walk out of a store, I'll feel the wind on my face. And it's kind of a soothing thing for me now. And so, but I really started to slow down, which I had never done slow in my whole life. I didn't walk slow, I ran. I like ran marathons, right? And so I was walking slow. And it's almost very childlike because then you start to notice all the little details. Like you notice the beetle walking across the ground, and it really does eventually start to inspire awe in this world that we're living in, and this is so counter to how I lived, Jim. And,
Hmm.
and then gentle movement. For me, movement has always been a way for me to feel things as well, like to process emotions. And so in the beginning, it was, gentle yoga and walk, slow walks, and later it got into, longer walks. And I love Pilates. It's a great form of mind body movement, that increases proprioception. And then later I got into a therapeutic style of dance called Five Rhythms, which
Yep.
is
I
really
did that for a
amazing.
while in Australia when I was there. That's really
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, it's so complementary to this work, and there's something for me, music and movement they can evoke emotion for me. It's a lot easier for me to get into those spaces and kind of metabolize them through the movement than maybe it would be for me to just sit down and journal sometimes. And so I was finding different ways for me to access those spaces. And it's playful too. Like I wasn't allowed to dance growing up. So
Mm.
it was healing for me on a lot of levels. And later I needed to do a lot of work with grief. For me, that was a big part. Grief and self-compassion were probably the two prominent themes for me on this journey. And so, Vanessa, with
With
your
the
grateful.
grief there, did you not allow yourself to grieve, or was like just generally speaking with crying or being sad, was that the emotion that you kind of had suppressed or you weren't from childhood weren't it wasn't really allowed or tolerated?
Yeah, there was really no time for grief. There was no time for feeling, especially in adulthood. Like I had to support myself. There was no time for that. And so looking back, even there were always, it wasn't that far under the surface. Like a lot of times I would feel like it would be this big grief that wanted to come up and I'd have to just suppress it down before I started doing this work. And so once I started, doing the emotional processing work, especially, there was a lot of grief that needed to come up. And so I did, Vanessa with Your Grateful Guide does a lot with grief work. So I had done like a 10-week grief group with her. And for me, a lot of it was, I didn't even always need to know why I was feeling what I was feeling. But for me, like going on walks, popping earbuds in and listening to certain music, that allowed me to feel what needed to come up while I was moving. And I would go on these walks and just like cry and cry. And I might even go on like just a 15-minute walk. And then I would come back, and sometimes my family wouldn't even know I was just out crying and crying, but it just needed to be felt. And, it might be like a tender morning or a tender day, but that for me was really powerful in helping me process that. And, and so much of this, Jim, is like, as one of my mentors says, like you live while you heal and you heal while you live. Like it's the real life that shows you where your boundaries have been porous and you're not speaking up where you want to, or fear's holding you back. And so it's like, I learned all this work and then I had to kind of silence it a little bit and just start living. And then life kind of shows you where you need to make some change, and your body will communicate to you. When you get attuned, your body like tells you. My body will tell me when I am out of alignment. And, it just happened this week. And then you have to go, okay, I'm listening, and you sit down and do whatever
Mhm.
it is that you're needing to do, or just needing to feel or needing to process. But along the way, at some point, I just had to kind of let go of needing the pain to be gone and recognize that it was like this process of like rehoming myself kind of. And in the process of that, trusting that the work itself was the path through, and then the pain started to go down. It was interesting though, because as the emotions started to go up, it was like the pain was here, the emotions were here, and then it started to switch. The emotions
Yeah.
were here. But then, for me, the pain, this just did not want to let go. It really didn't. And
Mm.
as the pain in my face and head started to go down and really started to get lower, I woke up one day with burning hands, feet, and mouth and pelvic area. And
Yeah.
I remember waking up and almost kind of at this point laughing a little bit, because there was absolutely nothing that would have triggered that in any way. And so I just met it the same way I met the rest of it, but it hung out for a few months. And
Isn't that
then,
interesting? So a few months, so you had that symptom imperative that is so, I just talked to two people today who had it and it's so common. And right, so maybe talk through that. So it
yeah,
switched, but you were right away kind of onto it and going, wait a
yeah.
second, this doesn't, so you didn't freak out, you didn't get fearful, right, or go into
I think
treatment.
that like first reaction we have, we can't always control, but then like the second action, right? You can go, okay. And it's not fun. I'm not happy that it's here, but I just said, okay, like you're here. And so now what are we going to do? We're going to continue to do what we've been doing. And it
You
didn't
kept
hang
moving
on.
forward. Yeah, I
Yeah.
used to tell people it's actually a sign of progress because it's
Yeah.
sort of like because you've dealt so well with the first one and now the brain just reacts again. Like it's not giving up that pattern so quickly or easily. And so each one you go through is like you're learning more, right? You're more deeply teaching your brain you're safe. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. You handled the second one, it sounds like really well. But it
Yeah.
still
That
took a few months for it to go away. It wasn't like a quick
few
fix.
months and I had like ear ringing. I remember waking up one
Mhm.
day with ear ringing, and it was after something that had done this day before that was pretty big. Can't remember what it was, but it was so loud. I actually jumped out of bed. I thought my neighbor's alarm was going off.
Wow.
And I just was like, okay. And that one went away pretty quickly, but yeah, it moved around my body and, it just
How many did
was
you think you had? So you had that first big one right in the facial, and that started weakening, and then it went to,
the hands, foot, and mouth.
yeah,
And like pelvic area, which
yeah.
I've had like some pelvic symptoms too. Um, Burning like tongue, teeth. Yeah, I don't know. I don't spend a whole lot of time.
No, no, I was just curious more because it's fascinating how the
Yeah.
brain, right, kind of moved it around for you for a while.
Yeah, and then I had a lot of dysautonomia. I didn't talk about that, but that had been something I'd had in the past where I would feel like I was going to pass out when I was in a grocery store, or I'd actually almost passed out several times while I'm with a patient in my office and had to excuse myself, and they would have to excuse the patient. And so on this journey, kind of vertigo has also been a symptom imperative
Mhm.
that I've worked through. But yeah, they just, and also the thing I would share is I had massive flares until the very end of every symptom that I had. So, and it was interesting. It's something Christy and I had noticed. It was a pattern for me. It would get really, really loud to the point where it was almost kind of scary again for me. And then it would just peter off over the next like 4 to 6 weeks. And my last one was my GI related symptoms. I have GI pain and things that I'd always associated with SIBO. That was I'd had for 30 years. I actually didn't think that would maybe ever go away. I'd learned to live with it. It wasn't really that bothersome. It was annoying, but I just thought I may always have that. And so that was the last one to go. And it got so loud. I remember one night it woke me up and I thought, you know what, I think I need to get maybe scoped again. Like I need to check this out. But nothing had changed, and so I just decided to do the same thing I'd always done with it. And a lot of this too is you start to go into the symptom and you start to ask, like, what is it? Why are you here? What is it
Mhm.
that you need from me? And I remember it got so loud and then it just went away for the next
Yeah,
month.
I mean, I just want to pause for a second because everybody listening, take this in. This is so common and normal, and you had to persevere through multiple symptoms, right? Keep coming and trying to get your attention and scream danger, threat, and right, and it would just raise the alarm even higher. But what we understand with fear, and as you saw with fear, it can only go so far. And right when people are about to throw the towel in and give in, or is right when it's about to start going down. And so you were
Yeah,
able to persevere through those fear spikes each time teaching your brain more and more safety, right? And the brain pulled out everything it could, right? It went to every symptom it could think
yeah,
of. The SIBO was the big one. I'll
yeah.
save that for last, right? Because that was, you didn't think you could get over that.
Oldest.
And it almost got you, right? It almost sucked you in, but it sounds like you stayed with the process.
Mhm. Yeah, and I would say too, I think it's so important. Again, we're not meant to do this alone. We are not meant to
Yeah.
heal alone. And so I had, it was a small circle of people that I had met through this work and become friends with, or, I had Christy and Jeannie who had journeyed through this themselves. And so when this would happen to me, I would reach out to them and they are reflecting back to me like, you got this. Yes, we've seen this pattern before,
Yeah.
confident that this is going to do the same thing that it's done. And so I think, a lot of times we want to do this work alone. We don't think we need that, but I would encourage everyone to find people in the community that are supportive because we really are. I mean, I talk to people. I talked to a woman in Australia who had journeyed through something similar as me, and had been recovered for healed for a few years. And she jumped on a Zoom with me and she talked to me just on her own time. And there's a lot of us in this community that are willing to do that because we're kind of all standing on the shoulders of the people that have walked in front of us, and we're willing to do that. I mean, that's why we do. It's not easy always to share recovery stories, and but I just remember when I heard my first recovery story when I was in the thick of this, it's life changing. It's life changing. So,
Life
find
changing.
your
Yeah.
people.
And it gives you that hope. And I mean, your story is just amazing because you had to go, it was pretty severe, and then you had to go through a bunch of symptom imperatives, and like you mentioned, so many great tools too and things you did. So it was like when I'm listening to your story, it's like you did really immerse yourself in a variety of things. It wasn't just I did this one thing, right? Like you mentioned so many different things that were all helpful, right? But at the end of the day, you had to just kind of go through in real time these symptoms and work through them. You know?
Yeah, you really do. You just got to, because I think too, we can get kind of obsessed with the work and then you're listening all day and which is great. I think we all go through that for a period to help with our belief and all of that. And then for me, it was really more about like I saved the recovery stories that really resonated with me and I saved recordings. Like I love your recordings, Jim. They're so soothing that soothed me for hard times. And then it was about going and living my life and kind of quieting the noise of that so that I could begin to do the work that I needed to do.
Yeah.
So,
And looking back, like, would you said grief, like, if you look at the emotions just for a moment, like, if you had to say, to me, it sounds like a lot of fear, what the symptoms were. Like, what emotions do you feel like you were the strongest ones you had, or the ones you had to work through, that where you saw the most, I guess, bang for your buck, or the most sort of recovery from it, helped you the most?
well, grief for sure. I had like mountains of grief to go through. And I didn't need to know why. Sometimes I did. Sometimes it was memories and certain experiences, but it was developing just this awareness when something needed to come up and be felt and creating space for that and knowing that it didn't have to ruin your whole day. Like it could just be a pocket of your day where you're allowing this to be felt, but I had to create some space for that. And so grief, and then it's not necessarily emotion, but like so much self-compassion, like I would do for my child that I love. I had to turn that on myself, and I had never done that my whole life. I that wasn't a foreign that was a foreign thing for me. And so, to really hold myself and just say, of course you feel this way. Like, of course that, whatever it was, like, oh, you're having a hard day. Like, of course you are. You've experienced pain all day. This is
Yeah.
not fun.
And before that, how were you, what were you like before that? What was your personality before? Were you
Oh,
hard on
just,
yourself or critical or?
yeah, critical. It was just high achiever, high performer, bypass myself, and to the point of exhaustion and never ending list of things that I wanted to accomplish and do. And then you get to a point where, and I was feeling this, like, I didn't even know why I was doing this anymore. Like, why do I feel like I need
Yeah.
to do all these things? Like, it's not bringing anything, but it's really hard to get off of that hamster wheel. And so it was just, I was the sanguine, happy yes person, the extrovert, the go, go, go. And, in the process of that, I mean, I'm still those things to some extent, but, I'm very different in a lot of ways as well
Yeah. It
today. And
sounds
I
like
think
I would say you softened some of those
you do.
traits that you had, the rushing around and going so fast and go, go, go. You slowed yourself down, right? Became more mindful,
Yeah, I would
became more
say
self-compassionate.
life is done much slower as it can be. I still have to adult, I still have kids, but I think too, there's also a grieving of who you were because now when you start to show up, you learn who you are more authentically because there's a part of me that didn't even really know who I was in a lot of ways. And you realize, oh, I don't want to show up like this anymore in certain relationships. And so there's a grieving that comes when you realize, oh, I might disappoint people because I don't show up that way. And so I would say grief was a pretty prominent emotion for me
Yeah.
throughout.
And did you notice as you were like processing that grief, you just felt your system calming down more?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just had something that I moved through this week. And, my body today, I don't live with any chronic symptoms at all. I don't live with chronic pain, any chronic symptoms, but my body speaks to me.
It
I feel
knows.
things in
Yeah.
my body all the time. And so just this week, things had started getting louder and louder. And then I needed to move through something. I needed to feel something. And so, I gave myself that space. I went on my walk with my music and let myself, feel it. And the next day, I felt like a new person. It's really a wild experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Even that, it's good that you made that point because I think even though you're recovered, you're fully recovered, the body still speaks, the body emotes, and you can still have things like you mentioned come up. And I think that's very normal, but
Yeah.
they're not chronic, right? They're not lasting. You know how to work with them now and they go back down.
Yeah. I remember I used to feel very triggered when anyone who was sharing their story would say that they still felt it. I could not imagine that. And, what I'll say is it's a very different experience. And it's a whisper. Like if you listen to your body when it's whispering, you hear it, you're attuned
Mm.
to it, and you respond, then it goes away. It's when you aren't listening and you're kind of overriding, and then the days go by and it's getting louder, and then you're like, okay, but that's the human experience, I think, for
That's a
all of
human experience. Yeah. It's a fantastic story. It's an amazing story. I
us,
love it.
Jim.
Like it's not a quick fix. And I think that's true for so many people. It was a journey for you in many ways. And it's just awesome to hear it. Do you have any last words for people before you go?
Think so. I just think for me, I would say is really do not do this alone. Don't try to do this alone. Fine, there are so many resources in this field, it's growing. So, if you're not able to work with someone one-on-one, there are lots of group offerings and online, hubs you can be part of. Like find your people that can journey alongside. We are really not even biologically wired to heal alone. And so I think a lot of us carry shame sometimes around what's happening. And so that's part of the healing too,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. No, it's well said. And I think there's so many resources. There's more and more right out there, which is great. It's growing every year. So yeah, for those looking for support, there's so many sources. And I'm glad you mentioned that a few times that like you wouldn't probably be able to do this if you didn't have that support, right, helping you through it. So
Yeah.
very well said. Thanks so much for being here, Jessica. I really enjoyed your story.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.